Every day in offices across America, conflicts arise that test the very foundations of human dignity. A manager pressures an employee to falsify reports. Colleagues compete for promotions through deception. Teams face impossible deadlines that require sacrificing quality or honesty. These moments reveal something profound about human nature. We possess a rational capacity that can either guide us toward universal moral principles or abandon us to the chaos of self-interest. After decades developing a critical system in Königsberg, I discovered that reason itself contains the key to resolving even the most complex workplace dilemmas. The categorical imperative doesn't merely offer abstract moral guidance, it provides a practical framework for transforming professional environments into spaces where human dignity flourishes. When we understand that our actions must pass the test of universal law, workplace conflicts transform from power struggles into opportunities for moral leadership. The question isn't whether ethical principles apply to business, it's whether we have the courage to think and act as rational beings deserve. Chapter 1: The Rational Foundation of Professional Ethics. The modern workplace presents a fascinating laboratory for examining how reason can govern human relations when properly understood. During my years developing the critical philosophy, I recognized that all genuine moral principles must emerge from reason itself, not from external authorities, market pressures, or corporate cultures. This insight proves revolutionary when applied to professional environments where competing interests often mask deeper questions about human dignity. Consider the fundamental structure of workplace relationships. Every interaction between colleagues, supervisors, and subordinates involves rational beings capable of moral autonomy. Yet contemporary business culture frequently treats individuals merely as resources to be optimized, costs to be minimized, or obstacles to be overcome. This instrumental view violates the most basic principle of practical reason, that humanity, whether in your own person or that of another, must always be treated as an end in itself, never merely as means. The categorical imperative provides the transcendental foundation for workplace ethics precisely because it doesn't depend on particular business models, industry standards, or economic conditions. When I formulated the principle that we must act only according to maxims we could will to become universal laws, I was establishing a criterion that applies regardless of external circumstances. This universalizability test proves especially powerful in professional contexts where short-term pressures often tempt us to make exceptions for ourselves. Imagine a sales professional considering whether to exaggerate product capabilities to close a deal. The maxim underlying this action might be, when financial pressure is high, it's acceptable to mislead customers about product specifications. Can this principle be universalized? If every salesperson adopted this maxim, the entire concept of honest business relationships would collapse. Customer trust, the foundation of sustainable commerce, would become impossible. The contradiction reveals that such behavior fails the basic test of rational consistency. This analysis demonstrates how practical reason cuts through the complexity of competing workplace interests to reveal fundamental moral structure. The categorical imperative doesn't ignore business realities, it provides the only solid foundation upon which genuine professional success can be built. When we act from duty rather than mere inclination, we discover that moral behavior and long-term business effectiveness align in ways that purely consequentialist approaches cannot achieve. Chapter 2: Universalizing Professional Maxims. The power of the categorical imperative in workplace contexts becomes evident when we systematically apply the universalization test to common professional dilemmas. Every action in business environments expresses an underlying maxim or principle that can be examined through reason's legislative capacity. This process reveals how many apparent conflicts dissolve when subjected to rigorous moral analysis. Take the pervasive challenge of workplace honesty. An employee discovers that her supervisor has been systematically overstating departmental performance in reports to senior management. She faces pressure to remain silent to protect her career prospects. The maxim implicit in her silence might be, when speaking truth could harm my professional advancement, I should remain quiet about others' deceptions. Can this principle become a universal law? If every employee adopted this maxim, the entire system of organizational accountability would collapse. Management decisions would be based on systematically false information, leading to poor resource allocation, failed projects, and ultimately organizational destruction. The contradiction is clear. A principle that undermines the very possibility of rational business decision-making cannot be universally adopted. This analysis reveals that speaking truth, even when personally costly, is not merely advisable but rationally necessary. Consider another common scenario: competing colleagues who must collaborate on a project. One team member considers withholding crucial information to make others look incompetent by comparison. The underlying maxim, when collaboration could diminish my relative standing, I should sabotage colleagues' efforts. Universal application of this principle would make all teamwork impossible, destroying the foundation of modern organizational productivity. The universalization test also illuminates positive professional duties. A manager must decide whether to provide honest feedback to a struggling employee whose improvement would require significant time investment. The maxim of developmental leadership, when employees need guidance, invest time in their growth even when more immediate gains are available, passes the universality test brilliantly. If all managers adopted this principle, organizational learning, employee development, and long-term productivity would flourish. This systematic approach demonstrates how the categorical imperative doesn't impose external constraints on business activity but reveals the rational structure that makes sustainable professional relationships possible. When we act on maxims that can be universalized, we contribute to workplace environments where rational beings can flourish as autonomous moral agents while achieving genuine professional effectiveness. Chapter 3: Human Dignity in Professional Relationships. The second formulation of the categorical imperative, treating humanity always as an end and never merely as means, transforms how we understand every workplace interaction. This principle doesn't prohibit using others' skills, expertise, or labor in pursuing business objectives. Rather, it demands that we simultaneously recognize and respect the inherent dignity of every person with whom we work. This recognition revolutionizes professional relationships in profound ways. Consider the common practice of performance management. Traditional approaches often treat employees as variables in productivity equations, focusing solely on output metrics while ignoring their development as rational beings. A Kantian approach recognizes that authentic performance improvement requires engaging employees' capacity for moral autonomy. This means providing clear expectations, honest feedback, and opportunities for growth that honor their dignity as thinking, choosing agents. I invite you to examine your own professional relationships. Do you see colleagues as complete persons with inherent worth, or primarily as means to accomplish your objectives? This distinction proves crucial because treating others merely as instruments inevitably corrupts both the relationship and the outcomes it produces. When people sense they're being manipulated rather than respected, they respond defensively, creatively finding ways to protect their dignity even if it undermines organizational goals. The principle of human dignity also illuminates hiring and promotion decisions. Selecting candidates based solely on their potential contribution to bottom-line results, while ignoring considerations of fairness, development opportunities, or long-term growth, treats applicants merely as means. A dignity-respecting approach evaluates candidates comprehensively, considering not only their potential contribution but also how employment will serve their legitimate aspirations for meaningful work and professional development. Workplace conflicts often arise when individuals feel their dignity has been violated, when they're excluded from important decisions affecting their work, when their expertise is dismissed without consideration, or when they're assigned tasks that seem designed to humiliate rather than challenge them productively. These conflicts resist resolution through purely procedural or economic solutions because they touch fundamental questions about respect for human worth. The most transformative insight emerges when we recognize that respecting others' dignity enhances rather than constrains professional effectiveness. When people feel genuinely valued as complete persons, they contribute creativity, loyalty, and discretionary effort that cannot be commanded through traditional management techniques. They become partners in shared enterprises rather than reluctant participants in others' agendas. Chapter 4: Goodwill versus Strategic Behavior. The distinction between acting from duty and acting merely in accordance with duty proves crucial for understanding why some workplace relationships thrive while others remain superficial and conflict-prone. Many professional behaviors appear ethical but emerge from strategic calculations rather than genuine respect for moral principles. This difference in motivation creates fundamentally different workplace dynamics. Consider a manager who treats employees fairly not because fairness is right, but because human resources policies require it and violations could result in disciplinary action. This behavior conforms to duty but doesn't spring from duty itself. The employees can sense this difference, even when they cannot articulate it precisely. They recognize that their fair treatment depends on external enforcement rather than their manager's commitment to their dignity. This recognition breeds insecurity and defensive behavior that undermines team effectiveness. Contrast this with a manager whose fair treatment emerges from genuine recognition that employees deserve respect as rational beings capable of moral autonomy. This motivation creates consistency that employees can trust even when policies change, enforcement is absent, or market pressures mount. The goodwill underlying such behavior provides a stable foundation for professional relationships that can weather the inevitable storms of business competition. Strategic behavior often generates workplace conflicts because it treats moral principles as optional tools rather than necessary foundations for human interaction. When market conditions shift, strategic actors abandon fairness, honesty, or respect for others' dignity if these principles conflict with immediate advantage. This inconsistency creates an environment where everyone must constantly guard against being exploited, making genuine collaboration impossible. The capacity for goodwill, acting from duty rather than inclination, distinguishes human beings from everything else in nature. In workplace contexts, this capacity enables us to maintain ethical standards even when doing so requires personal sacrifice. A salesperson who refuses to exploit customers' ignorance, even when competitors engage in such practices, acts from recognition that honesty is required by practical reason itself, not merely by company policy or legal requirements. Acting from duty also provides clarity in complex situations where rules conflict or guidance is ambiguous. When employees understand that their supervisor's decisions emerge from consistent commitment to moral principles rather than shifting strategic calculations, they can predict how conflicts will be resolved and feel confident that their interests will receive fair consideration. This predictability reduces the anxiety and defensive behavior that characterize dysfunctional workplace relationships. The revolutionary insight is that goodwill proves more effective than strategic behavior for achieving sustainable professional success, precisely because it creates conditions where rational beings can work together productively rather than merely competing for advantage. Chapter 5: Moral Autonomy and Workplace Freedom. The tension between individual autonomy and organizational hierarchy presents one of the most challenging aspects of workplace ethics. Many conflicts arise when employees feel their capacity for rational self-determination is being denied or when managers struggle to balance respect for autonomy with legitimate authority requirements. Understanding the proper relationship between freedom and authority requires examining how moral autonomy operates within structured professional environments. Moral autonomy doesn't mean individuals can ignore legitimate organizational requirements or pursue personal preferences without regard for collective objectives. Rather, It means that rational beings possess the capacity to understand and freely commit to principles that govern their professional conduct. This understanding transforms the nature of workplace authority from external coercion to shared rational commitment to principles that serve human dignity. I invite you to consider how this distinction applies to your own professional experience. When do you feel most engaged and effective at work? Most people report highest satisfaction when they understand how their contributions serve meaningful purposes and when they can exercise judgment in pursuing those purposes. This response reflects our nature as rational beings who flourish when we can freely commit to worthwhile objectives rather than merely comply with external demands. Effective leaders understand that sustainable authority emerges from rational persuasion rather than positional power. When managers explain the reasoning behind decisions, involve employees in problem-solving processes, and respect their capacity for moral judgment, they create conditions where autonomy and authority support rather than conflict with each other. Employees willingly accept direction because they understand and endorse the principles guiding organizational decisions. Workplace conflicts often arise when this balance is disturbed, when authority becomes arbitrary or when autonomy claims ignore legitimate collective requirements. An employee who refuses reasonable assignments because they conflict with personal preferences denies the rational basis for organizational cooperation. Conversely, a manager who demands compliance without explanation treats subordinates as mere instruments rather than thinking beings capable of understanding and endorsing organizational purposes. The antinomy between freedom and authority resolves when we recognize that rational beings can freely choose to limit their individual discretion in service of higher purposes that honor human dignity. A nurse accepts hospital protocols not because she's forced to comply, but because she understands how these procedures serve patient welfare. Her autonomy is expressed through rational commitment to principles that transcend personal inclination. This synthesis reveals that genuine workplace freedom consists not in absence of constraints, but in the capacity to act on principles that rational beings can universally endorse. Such freedom enables collaboration based on shared commitment to dignity-respecting purposes rather than mere coordination of competing interests. Chapter 6: Hope and Meaning in Professional Life. The relationship between moral duty and human flourishing in workplace contexts reveals deeper questions about meaning and purpose that practical reason cannot ignore. Many professional conflicts arise not from disagreements about specific policies or procedures, but from more fundamental concerns about whether work can serve purposes worthy of rational beings created for moral autonomy. The postulates of practical reason provide crucial insight into how workplace environments can support rather than undermine human dignity. When individuals feel their professional activity contributes to purposes they can rationally endorse, they experience a form of satisfaction that transcends immediate pleasure or material reward. This satisfaction reflects recognition that their work honors their capacity for moral autonomy by serving ends consistent with human dignity. Conversely, when work requires systematic violation of moral principles or serves purposes that degrade rather than elevate human potential, conflicts arise that resist resolution through purely procedural or economic adjustments. The postulate of moral freedom proves essential for understanding workplace motivation. Individuals who feel their professional choices are entirely determined by market forces, organizational politics, or survival pressures lose connection with their capacity for moral agency. They may comply with requirements but cannot experience the satisfaction that comes from freely choosing to serve worthy purposes. This loss of agency creates resentment that manifests in various forms of workplace conflict. Rational hope for ultimate justice also influences professional relationships in subtle but important ways. When employees believe that ethical behavior will be recognized and rewarded, even if not immediately, they're more likely to maintain moral standards under pressure. Conversely, environments where ethical violations consistently produce advancement while moral behavior is ignored or punished create cynicism that corrodes organizational culture. The highest good, the synthesis of virtue and happiness, cannot be guaranteed in any particular workplace, but organizations can create conditions that make such synthesis more likely. This involves recognizing that sustainable success requires aligning business practices with principles that rational beings can universally endorse. Companies that systematically violate human dignity may achieve short-term profits, but they ultimately undermine the social conditions necessary for long-term prosperity. Consider how this applies to contemporary debates about work-life balance, employee development, and corporate social responsibility. These discussions often focus on competing claims between individual needs and organizational requirements. A Kantian analysis reveals that apparent conflicts dissolve when both individual and organizational purposes are aligned with respect for human dignity and rational autonomy. The practical implication is that meaningful work must serve purposes that transcend immediate self-interest while honoring the moral capacity that distinguishes human beings from everything else in nature. Chapter 7: Practical Applications for Modern American Workplaces. The principles of practical reason provide concrete guidance for addressing specific ethical challenges that characterize contemporary American business environments. From technology ethics to diversity and inclusion, from remote work dynamics to environmental responsibility, Kantian analysis offers frameworks for navigating complex professional terrain while maintaining commitment to human dignity and rational consistency. Consider the ethical challenges posed by artificial intelligence and automation in workplace settings. The categorical imperative provides clear guidance. We must ask whether our approach to implementing these technologies could become universal principles for how rational beings integrate technological advancement with respect for human dignity. Policies that treat displaced workers merely as casualties of progress fail the universalizability test because they ignore the inherent worth of persons affected by technological change. A Kantian approach to workplace technology requires considering not only efficiency gains but also how implementation affects employees' capacity for meaningful work and moral autonomy. This might involve retraining programs, gradual transitions that allow workers to adapt their skills, or redesigned roles that leverage uniquely human capacities for moral reasoning and creative problem-solving. Such approaches honor the principle that persons must never be treated merely as means to technological advancement. Diversity and inclusion initiatives also benefit from Kantian analysis. Many contemporary approaches focus primarily on demographic representation or cultural sensitivity without addressing deeper questions about respect for rational autonomy. The categorical imperative demands that inclusion policies be based on recognition that all persons, regardless of background, possess equal dignity as rational beings capable of moral agency. This foundation provides more solid ground for inclusion efforts than approaches based solely on group identity or historical grievance. Environmental responsibility in business contexts presents another area where Kantian principles prove illuminating. The universalizability test applied to environmental practices reveals that policies causing ecological damage cannot be rationally endorsed because they undermine the conditions necessary for future rational beings to flourish. This analysis provides ethical grounding for sustainability initiatives that transcends mere compliance with regulations or public relations considerations. Remote work and digital communication technologies create new challenges for maintaining workplace relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to ethical principles. The categorical imperative requires that virtual interactions honor the same standards of honesty, reliability, and respect for others' dignity that govern face-to-face professional relationships. This means avoiding the temptation to be less transparent or accountable simply because oversight is reduced in remote environments. These applications demonstrate how Kantian ethics provides practical frameworks for addressing 21st-century workplace challenges while maintaining commitment to timeless principles of human dignity and rational consistency. Conclusion. The conflicts that plague modern workplaces arise fundamentally from failure to recognize that professional environments are communities of rational beings capable of moral autonomy. When we apply the principles of practical reason to workplace relationships, testing our actions through universalizability, treating colleagues as ends in themselves, and acting from duty rather than mere strategic calculation, apparent conflicts often resolve into opportunities for moral leadership. The categorical imperative doesn't constrain business effectiveness, it provides the only foundation upon which sustainable professional success can be built. Organizations that honor human dignity create conditions where rational beings can collaborate productively rather than merely compete for advantage. As you face your own workplace challenges, remember that your capacity for moral autonomy elevates you above the realm of mere economic calculation. You have the power to transform professional environments by acting on principles that rational beings can universally endorse. This is both your highest calling and your practical opportunity for creating workplaces worthy of human dignity.